Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, February 18th session of the Lake Forest City Council. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Certainly. Honorable Mayor Tack.
Here.
Alderman Novit is absent. Alderman Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Notes.
Here.
Alderman Power.
Here.
Alderman Gashgarian.
Here.
Alderman Lippert.
Here.
Alderman Weber.
Here.
Alderman Walder.
Here.
Mr. Mayor, you have a quorum.
Rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. I'm on. Okay. First item is comments by mayor. First topic we'd like to discuss is the reaffirmation of the city's AAA bond rating by Moody's. Moody's has once again reaffirmed the city's AAA bond rating, which is a reflection of our strong financial position. In their report, their benchmarking data shows that Lake Forest compares favorably to other AAA rated communities across the country, which is really quite remarkable given the inherent challenges imposed upon us here in the state of Illinois. Among the metrics that are highlighted on the slide, the city has made significant progress in reducing our long-term pension liabilities over the past few years. This is particularly of interest now. From 2021 to 2024, our adjusted net pension liability has dropped by roughly $75 million thanks to an accelerated pension contributions and strong market returns. The graph provides a clear illustration of the benefits from the forward-thinking pension funding decisions made by past and present city councils. And I'd like to particularly recognize former aldermen Tim Newman, George Pantaleone, and Jed Morris as champions for changing the city's pension funding model. I was around when that happened, and we basically gave them an idea and they came back with a plan that has worked exactly how they designed it. So congrats to those folks. As we regularly discuss, those decisions are saving future Lake Forest taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. We are a community that prioritizes financial stewardship viewed through the lens of long-term time horizons. It's nice to see validation of our efforts. And I would encourage all of us to continue that legacy for the betterment of future city councils and Lake Forest taxpayers. Next item is just letting everybody know about the chat with the chiefs. There was one today apparently that sounds like it was well attended, and there will be another one tomorrow at Hometown Coffee and Juice from 8 to 9:30. At which time you can connect with Fire Chief Rick and Police Chief Burke. All right, the next item is comments by City Manager.
And I'm pleased to say that I have no report this evening. You're welcome.
Outstanding. At this time, there's an opportunity for citizens to address the council. Is there anyone present who would like to address the City Council? Okay then. We'll move on to committee reports. The first is the Public Works Committee. We will be discussing approval of a recommendation from the Public Works Committee to award a Phase 3 professional design services agreement for the Deer Path Streetscape project to Thomas Engineering Group in the amount of $435,000 plus a 5% contingency in the amount of $22,000 for a total of $457,000. This will be presented by Jim Lockefear, Assistant to the Director of Public Works, and Byron Coots, Superintendent of Engineering.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to take the lead on this one tonight, and members of the City Council appreciate the time. This Phase 3 agreement, I have two just very brief slides talking through what that is and the process. The project, generally speaking, not necessarily focusing on that this evening. I know Superintendent Coots at the last City Council meeting provided a more thorough general update, and I think in some of the upcoming City Council meetings that might be more of a routine item. But that's all to say at the end of my presentation. If anyone has any questions on the project generally, I would certainly be happy to answer those. So phase 3 services, when we reference that, what does that mean? It includes construction, inspection, and documentation, observation, project closeout, and then a huge component of this too, the selected firm is absolutely going to be a key player in our extensive community outreach program that Director Olson and the communications team has really taken a lead on and really put together a very, very strong plan. This firm is absolutely going to be a part of that process going forward, managing the contractor on a daily basis and helping us craft, the various updates and language to keep our residents and businesses updated. These phase 3 services are absolutely aligned with the Illinois Department of Transportation grant award that we received back in April of 2023. We did receive, very fortunately so, a $2 million grant award from IDOT to support the construction of this project. And along the way, as City Council is well aware, with that grant award also came with a lot of IDOT process and procedures that we have to follow. We are absolutely playing by their rules, and again, along the way, we did a phase 1 design that's been approved by IDOT. Phase 2 design, that was a 2-year process that was just recently completed, and now the project is on IDOT's website, bidding and letting page, where we're excited for the bid opening to occur March 7th. But this is now that phase 3 where there is, it's probably an understatement to say this, but it doesn't sound like a lot with inspection, observation, documentation. It is quite extensive. There are multiple people that are part of this service agreement team where it is very much so a full-time job. And a lot of the staff is also IDOT certified. There's very specific forms that need to be used. And again, this was a known thing, and with that, we budgeted for it appropriately. We have an FY26 budget of $475,000. That's local funds. Again, the $2 million IDOT grant award is specifically for construction. Issued an RFP process to identify a firm back in early January. We had 10 firms ultimately download our RFP package, looked at this process, wound up with 2 proposals, and just a very quick comment on that has a lot to do with workload. What I heard back from some of the other firms that ultimately decided not to participate, this is a large scale, all summer long, 6-7 months, where just from a staffing perspective, I think some challenges from them. But we were very still fortunate to receive the 2 proposals. GSG Consultants at $280,000, Thomas Engineering $435,000. Thomas Engineering is bolded. That is the staff recommendation, the PW committee recommended firm, and I'll touch on the reasons why behind that. And to take a quick step back before I get into that, with any RFP, I think City Council's accustomed to hearing this, we have a standard procedure for which staff forms an RFP review team, and we look at very specific criteria that we make publicly available as part of that RFP pack. These firms know what we're looking for, and in this case, what was very important to us, project understanding, having familiarity with the city, the CBD, knowing that this is a very sensitive area, and again, that communication is going to be incredibly important. Experience and qualifications of the firm, again, this being tied to that IDOT grant, we wanted to ensure they had that experience, as well as cost. Cost is absolutely important. I'll touch on that more. And so going back to Thomas Engineering, that was the staff unanimously recommended firm. We were all very aligned and agreed very quickly that they were the best fit, and that was based on their significant project understanding. Thomas Engineering is the firm that worked on the phase 2 design that was just recently approved by IDOT. That was a 2-year process where they learned a lot about us. We learned a lot about them. They learned a whole heck of a lot about the CBD and what our expectations are for this project. Again, just from a standpoint of these impacts for the businesses and residents, just how important our communication is and how important it is for this project to go smoothly. They fully understand our high expectations there. Qualifications of their team, as part of the RFP submittal, we asked for all the staff positions that they recommend, and actually the people and their resumes, and we were very happy to see that two of the key personnel people, their project manager and their resident engineer, who will really be actually on site 30, 40 hours a week. Great experience, not only with IDOT projects, but with streetscapes specifically. Mount Prospect, Oak Park, the city of Chicago, some very large scale projects that were very successful. And then lastly, but certainly not least, is hours. And this relates directly to cost. As part of the RFP, we ask firms to submit not only the cost, but detailed hours associated with all their staff members and their job classification. That really lets us make some comparisons. And in this case, when we issued the RFP, from our staff perspective, we expected to see proposals with a minimum of about 2,200 to 2,300 hours. Thomas Engineering came in at 2,500 hours, which again, we were pleased to see that, which tells us they have a thorough project understanding. GSG, on the other hand, 1,800 hours. So they were about 400 hours less than what we were anticipating to see, and that's about 700 hours less than the Thomas Engineering proposal. And when you look at those costs between that hour difference, the two proposal amounts, if they were apples to apples and equal, that cost difference gets very much closer. And so with that, those three things combined, again, that's where the unanimous staff recommendation came from, to select Thomas Engineering. And with that, we're seeking as council action this evening, as the mayor outlined, to award this Phase 3 agreement to Thomas Engineering in the amount of $435,000 to include that 5% contingency, $22,000 for a grand total of $457,000. Well, that's a lot of information. Happy to answer any questions about this agreement or the project generally.
I just want to say thank you for the thorough explanation of why we would go with the higher bid. That was very helpful in making this decision, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Mr. Lockefier? Alderman Powers.
A couple weeks ago or a couple meetings ago, we did the Bank Lane Streetscape project, which will be going out to bid also, and I'm assuming Thomas is going to be connected in and potentially be a bidder for that, for the synergies and all the things that we're taking advantage of now.
So Thomas Engineering was actually approved to do that design work at that last meeting, so they hold that service agreement currently. When it comes to the actual construction, Bank Lane, we do not have that IDOT funding tied to that project specifically. So from a local standpoint, all that, what I described with construction inspection, observation, all that paperwork that comes with IDOT, we will not have to do with Bank Lane. So
it's much more simplified.
Correct, and that's something that will be handled in-house by the engineering section.
Other thoughts or questions? Yes.
One of the things we talked about during our Public Works Subcommittee meeting was that the hours that you estimated were necessary to have an individual on site in the trailer who was really capable of working with our community and our businesses to take advantage of being creative, to keep streets open, sidewalks open as to the extent possible, taking advantage of sections of roadway that might be complete except for, let's say, punch list items. And again, being creative and trying to work with the businesses to minimize, the length of disruption over the entire construction period. And I think that was one of the things that was compelling to me, was having a full-time staff member at the hours and estimates that you projected to be here and in the safeguard of our businesses. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? I just have one quick one. So if the hours actually spent end up being less than this, do we save a little bit of money?
Yes, we get detailed invoices as part of it, and we pay for the hours that actually occur. They're not entitled to this full contract. They have to show that.
Perfect. Okay, is there anybody from the public that would like to ask a question about this matter? All right, hearing none. We will move on for a motion to approve a recommendation from the Public Works Committee to award a Phase 3 professional design services agreement for the Deer Path Streetscape project to Thomas Engineering Group in the amount of $435,000 plus 5% contingency in the amount of $22,000 for a total of $457,000. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, this will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Clemmons,
Yes.
Alderman Notes, Alderman Powers,
Aye.
Alderman Kashgarian,
Aye.
Alderman Levert,
Aye.
Alderman Weber,
Aye.
Alderman Walther.
Aye.
7 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. All right, we'll move on to the next item, which is items for omnibus vote consideration. As always, if there are any items that the alderman would like removed or taken separately, please notify me after I've completed reading them. All right, there are 5 items tonight. First is approval of the February 3rd, 2025 City Council meeting minutes. Second, approval of a resolution required to amend authorized signers for eConnect Direct account through Multibank Securities. Item 3, approve a 1-year extension to an existing contract with Vogue Printers for Dialogue newsletter printing services in the amount of $26,076 and a 5% contingency in the amount of $1,304 for a grand total of $27,380. Item 4, approval of design engineering services for the Green Bay Road Water Main and the Basswood Road Water Main replacement projects to the Thomas Engineering Group, and authorize the city manager to execute an agreement in the amount of $50,016 to include a 5% contingency in the amount of $2,501 for a total cost of $52,517. And item 5, award of the low bid for the 2025 inflow and infiltration repairs to Visu Sewer LLC, and authorize the city manager to execute an agreement in the amount of $261,170, as well as approving a 5% contingency in the amount of $13,059 for a total cost of $274,229. Are there any items that the alderman would like removed or taken separately? Okay, is there any comment on any of this? No, hearing none. All right, I would like to ask for approval of the 5 omnibus items as present.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Notes,
Aye.
Alderman Powers,
Aye.
Alderman Kashgarian,
Aye.
Alderman Levert,
Aye.
Alderman Weber,
Aye.
Alderman Walther,
Aye.
Alderman Clemmons.
Aye.
7 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
All right, we'll move on to old business. The first item in old business is one of Alderman Kashgarian's favorites, and this is consideration of an ordinance amending the Lake Forest Code regarding corkage fees, second reading, and if appropriate, final approval. Now, are we going to read the ordinance?
We can summarize what the
Okay.
Provisions
Should I
provide for-
summarize it, or should we have somebody with legal background summarize? I'm happy to summarize it. It basically is, the only change is we agreed to remove the minimum corkage fee of $10. It allows businesses to decide what liquor items they're willing to allow on site and set their own fees. The change that is here tonight in front of you really states that whatever the policy an individual business owner has, and this is for both of these items, they must make it public knowledge, either posted, in the menu or next to their liquor license, somewhere where interested parties will be able to see and understand what it is that that particular establishment will be charging them if they choose to do this. So, are there questions or comments? Alderman Weber.
Thank you. My question is in regards to enforcement of the posting. Is that whose responsibility is that, and is there going to be an enforcement of that? How is the city addressing that?
Yeah, I would expect that enforcement would probably be complaint-based. I don't know that we'll be visiting every establishment to ensure it's posted on a regular basis. Perhaps once when they're initially granted the license, and then after that, if we receive a complaint, we'll go and do an appropriate inspection.
Thank
I believe it as the liquor commissioner, I may do that.
Thank you.
All right, so, is there any other commentary on this matter from the public? Seeing none, all right. At this time, I would like to ask for a motion to approve consideration of an ordinance amending the Lake Forest City Code regarding corkage fees.
So moved.
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Goshgarian.
If we promise not to bring this up again, I will say aye.
Alderman Levert.
Aye.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walther.
Aye.
Alderman Clemmons.
Aye.
Alderman Notes. Alderman Powers.
Aye.
7 yea, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very nice, thank you. All right, we'll move on to new business. And the first item to be considered is the naming rights and recognition policy for city-owned amenities and public spaces, and this will be presented by our Assistant City Manager, George Asako.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Thanks for your time this evening. I'll just be going through quickly a draft of the recognition and naming rights policy that was included in your packet. And real quickly before I start, this really is truly a draft. So our goal today is to talk through at a high level some of the details of the policy and open for discussion and thoughts and recommendations. No pride of authorship. We're excited to hear if there are things, omissions or things that we want to include. So I just wanted to point that out. And secondly, I want to thank my colleagues, Mike Wick, Mike Thomas, and Kathy Zerniak for their time helping me put this together. Special thanks to Kathy too. She did a lion's share of putting this draft together. So always grateful for her support. So like I said, real quick, just background, and there's people in this room that know many more places that have been named, and the city is a place that obviously has had many civic contributions, both through volunteerism and people that have dedicated their time to the city, but also with private donations and philanthropic contributions that have been significant in nature. And so just a couple recent examples that I highlighted here are the boardwalk at the beach and the Gorton room, the Stewart Room in the Gorton Community Center, a couple examples. That have been named over the years on a case-by-case basis. And what's our goal here today is really to come up with a process of procedures that are consistent in naming and renaming city-owned amenities. Also, of course, to honor that philanthropy we've discussed, but also respecting the city's values and traditions, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. Ensuring a consistent process. So as I've mentioned, this is something that's been done case by case over the years as these items come to the city for our attention. I want to make sure that this is something consistent. We know how the process goes. It's codified and no surprises for anybody. And ultimately to serve the long-term interest of the community, these decisions to name, whether it's an amenity, a room, whatever it may be, is a long-term decision. So we want to make sure that it serves the long-term interest, that the decision is made thoughtfully and carefully. And so at a high level, the policy has three categories that we've identified. Recognition, which are more smaller in nature, things like plaques on small amenities, things like benches, trees, fountains. If you've walked our beautiful parks or seen different spaces that have these plaques existing, that's what that category is for. Naming rights, these are for signs for significant contributions supporting some sort of construction or a project that was made because of a larger donation. And then as we were working through this, the item of extraordinary gifts, of the possibility that maybe there is a really significant financial contribution that's made to enable a large project that wouldn't be possible but for that contribution. So these are the three high-level kind of categories established. And approval processes. So the draft document includes an approval process for each one of these categories. And so at this point in the presentation here, I'll walk through bullet by bullet, step by step for each exact category and walk you through the approval process. Just kidding, I will not do that. At a high level, I just wanted to get the mayor's reaction on that. At a high level, every one of these processes starts with a written request. So depending on the category, it's either going to go to the city manager for approval or department head. And then goes on to the subsequent process. So when it comes to the plaques or signs for consideration, it's really the appropriateness of the respective amenity we're talking about. So for a plaque, it's just that. It's going to be no larger than the plaques that you've seen in the community already. It'll be consistent with that process. For signs, there's language in the policy that refers to the sign code that ensures that it's consistent with the nature of the space that we're looking at, that it's not visible from off of the site, things like this that are consistent with the aesthetic of the community. Project cost and the proportional donation. So again, when it comes to the plaques, there's language in the draft that says essentially that the donation should cover the entire cost of that amenity, whatever it is, and for the recognition plaque that is going to be placed there. For larger things, there's language about endowments for maintenance, long-term maintenance of these infrastructure, whatever it is, if it's a space or a field, whatever it may be, that has long-term implications as far as maintenance goes. Want to ensure that that kind of cost is covered as well. There are actual cost thresholds for the naming rights consideration on there. And then as far as approval goes, I want to make sure we touch on this. The city manager approval is for the plaque, so that's going to be an administrative level. We figured depending on the size, that could be something that could be more streamlined. And then for these larger financial contributions, naming, and the larger gifts, extraordinary gifts, those would be mayor recommendation to the city council for a larger discussion and approval by the council. And I think it's important to note that throughout the policy, there's very strong language about the council's sole discretion on whether to approve or deny a request. And then, of course, we talked about the long-term impact. If for any reason naming rights has to be revoked, if that has to happen, that can come to the council. Ownership of the property, the city's ownership, and the city council has authority to make decisions on over time. If something has to be replaced and renamed, those types of things are considered in the policy as well. And then finally, just real quick, restrictions and limitations. There are more in the policy here, but just a few to highlight. And just anecdotally, when I was doing my research in this, I found in 2011 there was some discussion about doing a naming rights policy at the time. It hadn't advanced for, I'm not sure why, but we used some of that language foundationally to start this process, and this was something we saw on there that we think is consistent with the way the city does business, which is that city officials or employees cannot be honored while in office or working with the city. So that'd be something after their tenure is complete, that such a person could be considered potentially for a naming or being honored, recognized for whatever it may be. Naming rights cannot serve as advertisements. So early on I mentioned being consistent with the culture and traditions of the city. Essentially what this means is the city is not for sale, right? So pick a corporation, the idea isn't to have some big corporate name on a sign saying, whatever field brought to you by whoever, or whatever facility brought to you by this company. The goal is, and this is the last piece here, the goal of this policy is to focus on not city buildings or not an entire park, but rather amenities within them. So it could be a ball field, it could be a pavilion at a park, a room, or a conference room in a facility, things of that nature. So that's really it. Just wanted to walk you through at a high level what some of these items are in the policy. And again, open to your comments, questions, but eager to hear if there's any things, omissions or things that we should include moving forward.
Is there a certain category of donations in order to participate in one of those three categories? Are there dollar amounts like universities have?
So the dollar amounts that we reference are, and this is subject to some conversation, for the recognition, the smaller scale ones, it's more about covering the cost of those smaller amenities. So there isn't really a threshold. If it's a water fountain, if it's a bench, the cost should be covered with some money set aside for the long-term maintenance of that particular amenity. There is reference to dollar values in the naming rights, because typically that would be a significantly larger contribution. So there's language for 51% of the total cost of a project, or at least the maximum 500,000. So again, that's just something based on some recent history that we've put out there. Could be subject to change, but that's the only really reference we make to a dollar threshold.
Thank you.
Alderman Kashgarian.
Yeah, I have some general comments. First off, thank you very much for the work that you put in on it. It was sort of an all-encompassing topic, and we do live in a community that's very philanthropic, and I think it's appropriate if people would like to have some type of naming rights, that they have, guidelines that are well-directed and well thought out. I was always under the impression it was a little loosey-goosey before, and so Kathy, I want to thank you for the work that you did. I read through this initially, I read through it a second time and looked at the things that I really liked, and I read through it a third time to try and offer up some critiques, and I really couldn't. So I think it was a particularly well-written document and very thoughtful. I think noteworthy, George, as you pointed out, is this is all pending, a city council approval. So, and I know there are people who are going to be concerned about, again, advertising or some nefarious character. We probably will not have a Weinstein field or something of that nature referring to Harvey Weinstein. But I can assure you, though, if there is an appropriate donation from the Tack family, we'd be more than happy to name the police department after you, after you're out of office. But in all seriousness, though, I think there was a lot of thought and consideration put into this document, and I'm really grateful for it. Thank you for giving us this policy to look at, and as I look at it, I think it's pretty all-encompassing. The last note, I'm going to dovetail on what the mayor said before. These public-private partnerships are really critical to the city. We're moving into a time of maybe some restricted funding coming our way, and all we can do to partner with individuals or families or entities that can help alleviate some of our strain in terms of the obligations we have throughout the city, it's greatly welcomed. And, to that point, I joked about the mayor and the public safety building, but the police department building, but there are opportunities there where, we would really look forward and embrace any individual or entity helping with that, because I think it will stretch our dollars farther and allow us to do more for the city. So thank you again, George and Kathy and everybody else, because I think it was a job well done. Thank you.
Very good. Others? Alderman Walther.
I'll let Mr. Notes go first.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To your point about advertising, did you take the thought process any further in terms of, would that bar a company from using their logo as opposed to just having their name be in, say, the standard font that everything else is being written in, precluding that outright or
That's a
taking
fair,
it into consideration?
yeah, that's a fair question. I don't know that I think that falls in line somewhat, I think, with the notion of we didn't want to promote something that could be advertised and have something a little bit more tasteful, but something that could honor that donation, but still recognize, the individual or the company that did contribute. So I think that might be subject to some more discussion or worth looking into, but my interpretation of the way kind of we work through it would be that type of thing wouldn't be. But again, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but I think that's probably how we intended it, was to avoid having a logo or, say the company name type of thing.
Thank you, George.
I think it is important before we vote on it to have an understanding of what this document actually means. We don't want that to be ambiguous. My reading of it is the fact that if, say, an entity such as a business like Granger wanted to donate a sum of money, it would state the Granger Foundation or whatever their philanthropic entity was, with no other, advertising, no emblems, anything else. That's my reading of this. Is that a fair reading?
Yeah, I think that's appropriate, and an example I was going to use too, hypothetically, is the Chicago Bears providing a donation for a specific ball field within the community. Would that constitute an advertisement or just an acknowledgement of the entity that made the donation? I think, as George alluded to, importantly, is that all of this would still come back to the discretion of the city council to be able to decide what it deems to be appropriate or not. And so simply an acknowledgement of a corporate entity or a foundation, I think in and of itself, to me, doesn't seem to be an advertisement or to meet that threshold. But again, ultimately, that would be up to a city council to determine when it came forward.
Well, I would say this, though, that once you do it, it's done. Okay, so I think the best place the understanding we should have going forward, unless there's people who disagree, is that the policy as written does not allow the use of emblems or logos. If the city council wants to revisit that in the future and change it, I think that's fine, but I think to start from that point makes sense.
Okay.
Are there other questions? Alderman Wall.
So, just curious, George, do we have a good record or documentation for the existing plaques that are around the community, near benches, near fountains, near other areas?
Question, that's one I would defer to Kathy, or I don't know if Mike have any thoughts on that, but I'm not sure that we have a robust, detailed accounting of all of them, from my understanding. Again, these have been, as I've worked on this over the last few weeks, I've learned that these have really been case by case over time, or with a significant project that's come up, right? But, so I think that's true, that we don't have a detailed listing of all of them.
Thank you, George. As part of the Forest Park project, that became an issue, and I believe after that, the records have been kept much more diligently. So do we have everything? Maybe not, but I think the considerable work has been done to put that together.
So then my recommendation would be that maybe in addition, we could add a provision within this document that speaks to documentation and record keeping for these plaques throughout the community. It'd be great to have as a historical document and reference and keep those records.
Yeah, I think that's more of a policy decision going forward, that once the naming rights are instituted, that we will in fact have a city policy that anytime such thing is granted, we will list it in a record, and so we will know going forward.
If I may add, this will be an administrative directive that will be applied internally by staff also. So I was going to recommend that it would be this is essentially an SOP for us. So that's something we could add just to help codify that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, Alderman Weber.
Thank you so much. I will echo Alderman Goshgarian. I think it's well written and thorough, and I think it's a great guideline for the city to have in place as we continue to embark on more partnerships. The one comment or question I had is in regards to the replacement of such items or ongoing maintenance. I think it should be maybe spelled out somewhere, and again, pricing changes, but maybe have an example of what these items are. I know that, for example, I've heard that down at the beach, the benches are set. There really isn't space for any more benches. And due to the conditions, the weather conditions down there, that they often have to be refurbished. And what exactly is that? So just maybe in the back or as a policy that we have that information handy. I also think then having a document like this in place then allows the city, as we embark on more projects, to perhaps put a list out there of things that are potential for people to support. So, for example, Civic Beautification Committee has been discussing the gardens here in front of City Hall. Is that something out there that could be funded? Is there a tree that could be planted with a plaque? So I think those, as we continue and move into some of these strategic planning, we should have that list available for people to offer up.
I think it's a great point. I will say an early version of this draft did actually include a listing of potential opportunities. I think the thought process was we didn't want to self-limit in any way, and having some foresight as things might change over time or whatever it may be. So we were a little bit more focused on the types of things that could be, but it's a great point, and I think certainly, as you mentioned, over time, something we could find a way to promote as this becomes codified and used.
Yeah, because it states in here, I don't have it open, but it states that in terms of strategic planning and projects in place. So it's alluding to the fact that you're really not soliciting for people to just come up with random ideas.
Right.
You're looking to address projects that are already in motion. So the question is, where is that list when the project's in motion? Are we talking about benches down Bank Lane when that's redone? Are we, again?
Yep. That's a great point.
So people are aware that the opportunities are there. Thank you.
Alderman Notes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. George, there's a comment in the draft talking about a donation being sufficient to cover replacement over a 20-year period. I want to pick up on a comment that Alderman Weber pointed out. So we've got benches down at the beach that are getting refurbished. Are we committing to refurbishing that bench and maintaining that that donor's plaque over that 20-year period, and then after 20 years, the city is free to have a replacement donor put in? Or,
Right.
I'd like to just clarify is what period of time are we committing to at whatever level of donations we are?
Yeah, I think it's incumbent upon what the item, the amenity is and what the donation is. So I think the way that this is drafted, it's flexible enough to give the discernment to the council about how it could be created, right? We've historically dealt with these on a case-by-case basis as it is. So I think the point is just to ensure that we know, and I think Mike brought up memorials, for instance, that have significant maintenance over a long term. And at some point, they will fall apart if we don't keep up with them, and the cost might exceed what the city can actually handle in any particular budget year. So the thought is that we put the language in there to at least let the donors know this is an expectation. The 20 years, I think we also have the word typical right in there, because that's just somewhat consistent with other things we've seen. So the idea is to give the council that discernment, that put some language in there so that the donors know what to expect, and that we will want to talk about some sort of endowment or plan. Otherwise, if we have to refurbish or have to replace, the city doesn't have to worry about, a future council can say, well, this was in the policy, it was an agreement created, which this is part of it, is an agreement, that we're okay, the council's okay to make a change or do what they have to do as a result of that. So it's a great point, but we just want to make sure we identify it so people aren't surprised by that fact in 2 decades or whatever it is.
Alderman Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. George, thanks again for all the hard work. I think it's a great launching pad, knowing the generosity that's in our community to do these types of programs and the reward and recognition associated with it. I had the same question as Alderman Notes and Alderman Walther. So once we identify these, the first thing was, is there a shelf life? And we've talked about this 20-year point in time. I think there's also an aspect where, families move in and out of the community. And as we're evaluating some of these things, I think it's really important that we engage in those families, particularly if it's coming up on a 20-year shelf life of a particular bench or plaque or what have you. Because a lot of these are very emotional for these families. And I think it's really important, particularly in light of a lost family member, or, Dad had the 6 o'clock tea time at the golf course every single Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
That was his favorite place, that we kind of incorporate that and make sure that we're having that outreach if necessary. And then those families that aren't here or have moved away and there isn't that sentimental value connected to it, it would be important for us to, identify those so that we know kind of what we're working with as we move forward and create other opportunities.
Great.
But thanks for your work.
Thank you. Great point.
Alderman Kashgarian.
Well, I don't want to speak unless everybody's spoken already. Do you have something else, Rich? No, something I want to point out, and you're all bringing up very good points, but as you look at some of these larger donation that go to larger projects, and what comes to mind for me was my first endeavor on city council when we got funding for the rescue boat that we used down at the lake. One of the donors was very specific about when they contributed, making sure that there was appropriate maintenance of that boat, and in addition to those requirements of making sure. So it's sort of a two-way street, that over that 10-year period of time, they did provide adequate funding for that. So that kind of worked into the formula. So it's not just what our expectations are. They will be able to come to the table and put those reasonable expectations forward. And of course, it's all still subject to, what the city council deem appropriate. So,
yeah, I would just add real quick, that's a perfect example where there's also branding and logos. So I think we need to revisit that if we've allowed it in that unique circumstance, which has been an incredible asset for the community, particularly the lakefront. It's important to note that there are company logos and branding on that rescue boat. So if maybe we keep it a little more open-ended, if it's something similar, that we can respond accordingly.
And I would just add to that point, I think it would be helpful to get clarity from the council, because while I understand some aversions to perhaps corporate logos, we do also have many civic or other nonprofit groups. I know Alderman Weber referenced some of the garden clubs in town, or maybe the Forest Park Conservancy or the local Rotary Club. Would just be helpful to get clarity and direction from the council. Those groups that like to use logos to identify themselves but are not corporate in nature, if there's any aversion to allowing logos in that capacity, I think, again, as we look to get feedback from the council on updating this, some consensus from the group will be helpful, so we can come back and provide a final version consideration.
Alderman Weber.
Just commenting on that, I would not be opposed to non-for-profit logos tastefully done.
The fly in the ointment.
Right? But I also had another question, and that was in regards to, this calls out trees as donations that could have a plaque. What happens when the tree dies? And how are we going to address that if it dies prior to a 20-year period?
I think,
They pay to replace it?
yeah, I think it's similar, and I think the great points about the directory of people and notifying folks, so I think that comes into play. So the coverage of the cost, the city has the ability to reconsider, but if we have a good directory, we can reach out to those folks and say, this tree is dying, and we can re-engage them about planting a new tree. So I think that would be, it's written in such a way that could be done.
Because it's just reminding me of when I served on the cemetery commission, and that there are certain gravesite and plots, walls and things that as descendants move further and further away and they're not here, the lack of maintenance that's occurred and the challenges that our cemetery staff have had in contacting those family members. So again, just bring that up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments?
If you are looking for a position on logos, I do not like the idea of using corporate logos. I greatly appreciate Wintrust's contribution of that boat, but every time I see that, I feel like we've sold out. And we got a huge benefit for that, and I'm not saying it wasn't worth it, but I have an issue with that personally.
Well, and it's not just Wintrust. It's Northwestern Medicine also, so we don't want to sell them short because they helped contribute also. Yeah, foundation, excuse me.
I think the point is, though, that we're starting at a new place. I mean, we could go back and cite all kinds of things that perhaps we might have done differently, Bovarsky Park, just to name one. But we're starting anew, and so I do think it is worth, making a decision, logos or no. My own bias would be no for not-for-profits and for-profits. I don't see that there's a reason for that. I mean, identifying who it is that was generous seems to be adequate and seems to fit with the culture and character of Lake Forest, I would say, of sort of being sort of very low-toned. So the other thing that I would say is when an asset expires, like a bench, I do think there's the issue of the assets expired. If we have a registry, we can contact the people who had the plaque and say, would you like to renew this at the cost of a new bench? And if we have a registry, we can do that. And it's first right of refusal for that. And I think that makes sense.
You can absolutely do that.
So, any other commentary? Was there any commentary from the public on this? All right. Hearing none, let's see, where are we at now? I guess I ask for a motion to approve the naming rights and recognition policy for city-owned amenities and public spaces.
So moved.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, Should we bring back another draft to be with some of the changes to approve? Just, maybe it's a question for Adam. I just want to confirm procedurally.
I think they can be modified. Again, this is a policy. We're not writing an ordinance here. I think this, to the mayor's point, this is a guideline. It's a starting point. You can always modify the policy later on. I mean, we can wordsmith this from now until the cows come home. I think the mayor's right. We have something more workable now, more tangible, and we can always modify as we go.
Mr. Simon, do you have an opinion on this?
I think staff's gotten pretty clear direction. I think there was some consensus described by the elected officials about the logos. There really wasn't any disagreement about any of their item in the policy. So certainly there was some direction on how to administrate the policy, but in terms of the substance, I didn't hear any disagreement. And so I think it's probably in good condition.
Good to go.
Thank you.
All right. Let's try again. And this time I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the naming rights and recognition policy for city-owned amenities and public spaces.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
This will be a roll call vote.
Alderman Levert.
Aye.
Alderman Weber.
Aye.
Alderman Walther.
Aye.
Alderman Clemmons.
Aye.
Alderman Notes.
Aye.
Alderman Powers.
Aye.
Alderman Gasharian.
Aye.
7 yeas, 0 nay, motion carries.
Very good. We will move on to, are there any additional items for discussion or comments that city council members would like to make?
I want to make one.
Alderman Gosh-Garing.
All right.
We're going to start the clock.
What time is that? All right, I got, no, I just wanted to say that last Wednesday I reached out to Mike Thomas, and given this is my last year on city council, and I had never ridden around in a snow plow, I spoke to Director Thomas, and he was kind enough to allow me to do a ride-along with Stuart Cox, and Stuart is our assistant building maintenance supervisor. I had a great time with them, but more importantly, I was really impressed with the hard work that they do in terms of keeping our streets clean and safe. It was an enjoyable experience. Stu is a great guy, but more importantly, he's a real professional, as is the entire staff. So I just want to make a shout out to them. Every time we get those horrible snow reports, I think about those people out there keeping our streets safe and clean. So thank you to Public Works and in particular Stu. I had a great time. I would encourage you guys to do it in the future. It's fun. Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments? All right. Hearing none. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.